Well, good morning, everybody. Man, it's good to see you this morning. Things look a little differently today, obviously. Jim, thank you. Mr. Williams, thank you so much for filling in today. He did a fabulous job. I think he stepped out to get a drink of water. He did a fabulous job filling in for Todd today. We are so blessed to have somebody who can step in like that for Todd when he's away. So thank you. And then Pastor Dow called me Thursday and said, I'm sick. So I need you to preach on Sunday. I said, great. So we're here this morning. We're going to jump out of our series for the 1 week. I've entitled today's sermon to Divided or Together. Divided or Together. And we'll be in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, and we'll be in verses 4 through 16 this morning. But I just want to say, on behalf of Pastor Dow and Todd, last month was kind of a blur. We had the hurricane, and we had Missions Month, and we had Pastor Appreciation. So I want to say on their behalf and on my behalf, thank you so much for the lovely cards and gifts that you guys gave to us as your pastors. Man, we think it is an honor and a privilege to serve a congregation that actually loves their pastors. So it is such a blessing for us. So thank you very much for those gestures. But this morning, we're in Ecclesiastes, which some of you may not even know where Ecclesiastes is. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. It is not a familiar book of the Bible. It's not one that is often preached from. But I just felt like this is where God wants us to go this morning. So the writer of Ecclesiastes is the King Solomon. And Solomon, if you don't know much about him, he was a special kind of king. When he got to the throne, the Bible tells us that he sought after God, that he was a God-fearing man that sought him at all costs. So God gives him this opportunity to ask for anything he wants, and Solomon asked for wisdom. Now, between you and I, if God asked me for anything I wanted, I may not necessarily ask for wisdom. I might ask for a brand new Corvette or a Chevy 3500 dually diesel. You know, there's lots of things that come to mind when we think of what we can ask for God for. And Solomon asked for wisdom. So in asking for wisdom, God also gave Solomon great wealth, to the point that it is said that in 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 23, that King Solomon surpassed all the kings in the world in riches and wisdom. One common illustration that is used quite often of Solomon's wisdom is the time that there was two ladies that had fighting over a baby that was just born. And in Solomon's wisdom, he brings the baby in front of them, and he says, okay, if you can't agree on whose baby this is, we'll just cut it in half and give you each half. And obviously the mother of the child's like, no way, that's not happening. So he used wisdom to discern that situation. But if you ever read the book of Ecclesiastes, you'll see that Solomon had a favorite word. His favorite word in the book of Ecclesiastes is futile. Futile. What is futile? Well, futile gives the understanding of something that is worthless or vain or a vapor, gone very quickly. Futility is best pictured in Greek mythology, actually. This guy named Cepheus is banned to Tarsus, which is hell forever. And he has been given the endless task of rolling a stone up to the mountain to get out. The thing is, he never makes it. Each time he gets closer and closer, the stone rolls over him and he has to go to the very bottom and start all over. That is futility. So, this morning, this wise king, Solomon, he wants to protect us from things that are futile. he wants us to see what we can learn from Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verses 4 through 16. Let's read those this morning. It says, I saw that all labor and all skillful work is due to man's jealousy of his friend. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. The fool folds his arms and consumes his own flesh. Better one handful with rest than two handfuls with effort and pursuit of the wind. Again, I saw futility under the sun. There is a person without a companion, without even a son or a brother. And though there is no end to all his struggles, his eyes are still not content with riches. So who am I struggling for, he asks, and depriving myself from good? This too is futile and a miserable task. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their efforts. For if either falls, his companion can lift him up, but pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one person alone keep warm? And if someone overpowers one person, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer pays attention to warnings. For he came from prison to be king, even though he was born poor in his kingdom. I saw all the living who move about under the sun follows a second youth who succeeds him. There is no limit to all the people who were before him, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. You know, as you look in the earlier verses right there in verses 1 through 4, Solomon gives an example of a lot of injustice and oppression that's happening in the world. And sometimes he says that Solomon was even tempted to think that life would be better if he wasn't living at all. And as you look around culture today, you see the exact same thing. The depression rate is higher than it's ever been. People are struggling. And even as Christians, sometimes we're just, just get me out of here. Just get me out of here. So what can we learn today from this passage? I believe that he gives us some great advice to live by in a culture that is the way our culture is. The first thing I feel like he wants us to learn is to learn to be content. Learn to be content. Solomon has already told his readers back in Ecclesiastes 2 and verse 24 that there is nothing better for man than to eat, drink, and enjoy his work. I have seen that even this is from God's hand. It's a good thing to have a job. It's a good thing to do a good job good work at your job. But here's the problem. Even with all God's blessings, it seems like it can be distorted by sin at times. And this is God's blessing of work has been distorted by sin. If you look back at our passage, he shows us two problems. One, the man who works too much, and the one who refuses to work. There's two different people in that verse. Look at verse 4 with me. It says, I saw that all labor and skillful work is due to a man's jealousy of his friend. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. This individual's work is his life. Their job becomes all-consuming. And it's not a bad thing to work hard and do a good job. But the reason behind it is the motivation behind it is what's important. And that's what the King Solomon will point out to us as we go on. But then you also see the man who refuses to work. Verse 5 says, the fool folds his arms and he consumes his own flesh. Rather than joining the rat race, some people drop out altogether. Solomon says that these individuals consume their own flesh, and that's an expression to say they bring ruin upon themselves. You know, we have a lot of those individuals in our society today. It's not a good thing to give able-bodied people who are capable of working free money. Able-bodied people who are capable of working. Now, let me tell you, I have personally had plenty of assistance throughout time. As many of you can probably remember, 5 years ago, just over 5 years ago now, I fell from a building and I was not able to work for almost a year. And this church gave me assistance. And I'm thankful for that, but I wasn't able-bodied at the time. We do not help people who are just back there folding their arms, doing nothing, and collecting federal assistance that are able-bodied and working. We're not helping those people. As long as there's an unfilled position, we are doing those on welfare a grave disservice by paying them to stay home. Warren Wiersbe says this: laziness is a slow, comfortable path to self-destruction. So there's got to be a solution, though, right? If we have a problem, there's got to be a prescription for the problem. And I feel like he gives that there in verse 6. It says, better one handful with rest than two handfuls with effort and pursuit of the wind. Rest here can be translated contentment. Two-fisted consumption brings the person who is grabbing as much as possible and always grasping for more. You know, we just went through Halloween, and I pictured this as this verse here as kids. You know, you remember back when you went trick-or-treating and you got, you could fill a pillowcase full of candy. And then when you got home and after mom and dad inspected it and claimed theirs, you would just roll around in the floor and just candy, and double fisting it, right? And that's what he's saying here. And kids can be very greedy when it comes to candy at Halloween time. But that's what I picture here when I read that verse. Better than one handful with rest than two handfuls trying to grasp all that you can with effort. That's a pursuit of the wind. A bit later, Solomon wrote of the danger and greed when he said in Ecclesiastes 5:10, the one who loves money is never satisfied with money, and whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with income. This too is futile. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 6, but godliness with contentment is great gain. The Bible is full of warnings about the dangers of confusing material prosperity with the blessings of God. Philippians chapter 4 and verses 11 through 13 says this, I don't say this out of need, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know both how to have a little and I know how to have a lot. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being content, whether being well-fed or hungry, whether in abundance or in need. I am able to do all things through Christ who strengthens me. A survey of about 2,000 people in the U.S. labor force were asked the question that, does your faith influence your spending? Does your faith influence your spending? It found that faith makes little difference to the ways in which people actually conduct their finances. Here's the problem with greed and envy. We buy more than we can afford because we want more than we need. Let me rephrase. Let me say that again. We buy more than we can afford because we want more than we need. Someone said that credit cards let you start at the bottom and dig yourself a hole. Let me ask you a question, adults. How many, maybe teenagers too, how many have received a credit card offer in the last 30 days in your mailbox? Go ahead and put your hand up. Credit card offer in the last 30 days, right? Nationally, the average American has 4 major credit cards with an average credit card debt of $9,000. When you realize that a number of these individuals had been convinced to pay the very minimum. Let me give you a small example. If you owe $3,900, making a 3% payment would require nearly 42 years to pay that $3,900 off. And that $3,900 ends up costing $14,530. Over $10,000 more than what it would have cost you. The problem is we buy more than we can afford because we want more than we need. He says, he gives us this fair warning that we don't need to be double-fisted into things. That this greed, that this envy will eat us up. But Paul says that godliness with contentment is great gain, providing you with a spiritual gain. The love of money in the scripture is identified as the root of all kinds of evil, not the root of evil, but there are some danger signs of loving money. John MacArthur points out 5 in his commentary, and I put these in my notes. He says, number 1, those who love money are more concerned with making it than being honest. Number 2, those who love money never have enough of it. Number 3, those who love money tend to flaunt it. Number 4, those who love money resent giving it away. Number 5, those who love money often sin to get it. That's the problem. There's nothing wrong with having money or being wealthy. It's the problem if it consumes us. And if you're working just so you can have that next, so I can have that next, so I can have that next, that will eat you alive. I am thankful I live in the United States of America, the greatest country in all the world. But Americans are very envious of the neighbor. Paul reminds Timothy that some people who have, in 1 Timothy 6, 7 through 10, it says this, for we brought nothing into this world and we can take nothing out. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with these. But those who want to be rich fall into a temptation, a trap, and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and by craving it, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with pain. He says that love of money has pulled you away, has allowed you to wander away from God, away from your faith, with very painful results. That phrase, pierce themselves, literally means to be skewered from every direction and roasted like a piece of meat. That's what the love of money will do to us. The advice that Solomon advances is not of one of not having money or being poor or having too much money. The advice he gives us in this passage is to be content with whatever God has given you, whatever position God has put you in. It's got to be a life of balance, not just grasping everything we can. One of the problems with greed and envy is it tends to push away the friends we have. A lot of times you don't end up with good, true friends. So Solomon turns his page here in verse 7 through 12 to the value of friends. Look at verse 7 with me. It says, and again, I saw futility under the sun. There is a person without a companion, without even a son or a brother, And though there is no ends to all his struggles, his eyes are still not content with riches. So who am I struggling for, he asked, and depriving myself from good? This too is futile and a miserable task. You know, solitude is misery. Solitude is misery. Another good expression of that is it's lonely at the top. It's likely that an individual has sought out meaning in work and wealth, but has found himself alone in all the toughest situations. It's often found that one who climbs the ladder of success, they get increasingly lonely and have fewer people they can honestly call friends. This kind of individual who is driven never stops to ask the why question. Why am I knocking myself out? And for whom? Solomon explains that this too is meaningless. This too is miserable business. But there's a lot of profit. There's a lot of profit in companionship. Verse 9 says, 2 are better than one because they have a good reward for their efforts. When we read these words of Solomon, we tend to think in the terms of marriage. Many of you have been to a wedding where they use the 3-chord method to signify their unity. That comes right here from this passage of Scripture. But I think that's a practical implication, but I think it's much more broad than that. It's not just for marriage. The writer of Ecclesiastes wants us to understand that friendship is a good investment. When the author says in verse 9 that 2 are better than one because they have a good reward for their efforts, the words good reward can be translated a good return or for its means, or dividends paid on a wise investment. The very best investment you will ever make in your life will not be a financial investment. The very best investment you can ever make is in relationships. First and foremost, with a relationship with Jesus. This morning, if you're here and you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you've never entered into a relationship with Him, your life's probably full of greed and envy. Well, let me introduce you to the one who is a good friend that you can start a relationship with. And his name is Jesus. And he loved you so much that he died on a cross for you, even while you were yet a sinner, so that you could enter into a relationship with him. Some people try to accumulate possessions, and they're constantly trying to get more and better stuff. Marcus Forbes said this, however, since he has died, he knows that not to be true. If we spend all our lives trying to accumulate more and more possessions, he will never truly be happy and fulfilled. On the other hand, rather than focusing on what we can gain financially, we can focus on building relationships, trying to make friends and to be a friend. Maybe this morning you thinking, Jared, I don't really like people. I know some of you are thinking that. I prefer to keep to myself. You got any loners in the room? Like to just be quiet? Enjoy your quiet place without any hustle and bustle? Man, I know that exists. But there are some great benefits in having friends. And he tells us right here in our passage. Verse 9 says, 2 are better than one because they have a good reward for their efforts. Friends working together are more productive. Friends working together are more productive. The simple truth is that when 2 people combine their strength and creativity and talent, they can accomplish way more than one person by themselves. You know what? And the cool thing is there's something really special about working with somebody. The relationship that you can build with working with somebody. You know, I think of Vacation Bible School. My mind tends to go to Vacation Bible School a lot. But I think about all those 80 people working hand in hand together to accomplish a goal. One person could never do that. I am not creative. I have no imagination when it comes to decorations. None of the decorations in this room were a thought that came out of this brain, I can promise you. But that's why where two or three come together and work together, it can happen. Friends, lend one another encouragement. Solomon writes, "For if either fails, his companion can lift him up, but pity the one who falls without another to lift him up." Now, I know many of you have those people in your life that are called acquaintances. They're not true friends, but you say hello to them in the grocery store when you're passing carts, right? You got a lot of those people in your life. But you may only have a few that you call your real friends. Someone has suggested that we have been successful in life if we have enough close friends to act as our pallbearers at our funeral. That's what would make you successful, if you have enough friends to be your pallbearers. So how can you tell a difference between an acquaintance and a friend? Well, that's pretty easy. Just get in trouble. Get in trouble in the middle of the night. And you'll find out real quick who your friend is and who your acquaintance is. You can call your friend, your acquaintance up at 2 a.m. and say, "Hey, I'm in trouble." And they're like, "Well, what'd you do?" And then they're going to think about it for a few minutes before they decide how drastic it is, whether they're going to come help you or not. A true friend, when you call them at 2 a.m. and say, "Hey, I need you to come," and they're like, "Where are you at? What tools do I need?" That's what a true friend is. They're there to help, encourage. Proverbs 17:17 says this: "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for difficult time." You know, the thought of a friend that loves at all times comes back to David and Jonathan. David and Jonathan were best friends. The problem is that Jonathan's dad, Saul, the king, wanted David dead. And even in the midst of that, listen to what 1 Samuel chapter 23 and verse 16 says. "Then Saul's son Jonathan came to David in Horesh and encouraged him in his faith in God." Saul is actively pursuing David, trying to kill him, and his son Jonathan comes to encourage him. That's a true friend. What else? What other benefit comes from having true friends? Friends lend one another support. Verse 11 says, "Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm, but how can one person alone keep warm?" Sometimes we take passages and just see the literal sense, but I think the picture is much bigger than that here. We need help sometimes facing circumstances beyond our control. We need to be able to gain emotional strength when we don't have enough of our own. Sometimes it's cold out in the world. These are those circumstances that we're facing, a battle of how am I going to make it through this right now? And that is the time we need a friend to give us emotional strength. That Bible verse brings to my mind Forrest Gump. And when Forrest is in the war in Vietnam, it's raining, it's muddy out one night, and him and Bubba are both tired. And they sit down, and Bubba says to Forrest, he says, "Hey, you lean up against my back, and I'll lean up against yours. That way when we fall asleep, our faces won't fall in the mud. That's a friend. They needed each other in the moment. We all know that the reality of life is that we encounter a lot of people, and when we spend time with them, it seems like they suck our gas gauge down even. We leave their presence absolutely drained. But there are other people, and these are our friends, that when we spend time with them, our emotional gas gauge goes all the way over to full. There are two kinds of people, encouragers and discouragers. Which group would you fall in? You know, I think a lot of the people that are discouragers have no idea that they fall in that group. Why not decide today to be a friend, to be an encourager, to lift somebody up rather than tear down? The next benefit is that friends give each other strength. Verse 12 says, "And if someone overpowers one person, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken." When these words were written, it was based on a military strategy of the ancient world. Almost all combat was hand-to-hand combat, and soldiers went into battle with a partner, someone that could be counted on and trusted. The soldiers stood back to back of one another. They always kept their backs in contact and fought whatever enemy came from any side. Friends not only never stab you in the back, they also guard your back. A friend never puts up with gossip about their friends. Let me give you a good definition of gossip. Gossip is when someone says something negative or unkind about someone who is not present, whether it's true or not. A real friend is someone who will fight to protect you and your reputation. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. This is a proverbial way of saying there is strength in numbers. You know, he has more in mind than just the numbers. It's how they're woven together, braided. You ever taken a rope and seen a rope that has lots of different strands, or it has 3 sections of strands that are kind of twisted together, and then somebody will braid those 3 strands together? That makes the rope very strong. And that's what Solomon's saying here. All right, so the last point is that we got to learn, the third thing I think he wants us to learn is that popularity passes away. Look at verse 13 with me. It says, "Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer pays attention to warnings. For he came from prison to be a king, even though he was born poor in his kingdom. I saw all the living who move about under the sun follow a second youth who succeeds him. There is no limit to all the people who were before him. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind." Did everybody get that? It was super clear. This is a rag to riches story. So Solomon tells a little story in the middle of his explanation about a young man who takes the throne. And this young man rose to power unexpectedly, taking the place of the king who ruled before him. This young man was born relatively poor, but he rose to the highest office in the land. This new king ruled over a vast kingdom. The thing is, even this new young king can't rule forever. Even this new young king can't stay in that position forever. Eventually, this young king is going to pass away. Eventually, he's going to be replaced. Let me tell you, fame is fleeting. Just because you have lots of acquaintances, lots of so-called friends, you're the coolest guy on the block, that one day is going to go away. But I think there's a more important lesson he wants us to learn in this passage. In verse 13, it says, "Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer pays attention to warnings." Apparently, in earlier days, the king took advice, but eventually he no longer knew how to take advice. This tragedy is repeated again and again in our culture and in our churches. Let me give you a little example of how quickly we forget things. Just the other night, Elizabeth and I were watching a little bit of the World Series. And I love the game of baseball. I love just about any sport. But the very first time I ever watched every inning of every game of the World Series was while I was in the hospital. That's the first time I've ever got to sat down and actually watch all of it. You know what the crazy thing is? I couldn't remember who was in the World Series that year. They were the best of the best at the very top that year. And I couldn't remember who the Astros played. We had to Google it and find out who was in the World Series then. The fame is fleeting. You may not remember who won the World Series last year. You may not remember who won college football last year. There's some that do. But fame is fleeting. It's going to go away. It doesn't last forever. And if we're honest with ourselves, we'll acknowledge that life at the top is fleeting also. Our attention span, our memories, they're very short. And the one thing that we think about often is what have you done for me lately? You know, presidents and prime ministers, when they first come to office, a lot of times their approval rating is really, really high. And then as time progresses, whether they're a good president or a prime minister or not, it steadily decreases because people forget what's been done. Former Dallas Cowboys quarterback Don Meredith said this about quarterbacks: "Today you are in the penthouse, tomorrow you're in the outhouse." That's true of quarterbacks. That's true of pastors. That's true of state workers. That's true of teachers. That's true of construction workers. That's true of everybody. The people have a mentality of next man up. You can be replaced just like that. Fame is fleeting. We need to understand that popularity is not going to last forever. So, what can we learn this morning? Well, we need to learn to live in contentment. Don't let envy and greed drive you. Don't allow the fact that your neighbor got a new boat make you become a workaholic so that you might get a new boat. We need to learn to value the friends that we have. There are great benefits that come along with having some real friends. You get more accomplished. You know, there's truth in saying that many hands make light work. A good friend will lend encouragement and support and strength. Here's the thing, you need to value that friend. We need to learn that popularity passes away. This world is cruel and mean, and when you can no longer give it what those around you want, they just dispose of you. As believers, we need to stand together, not divided. We need to stand together, not divided. We need each other. Are we going to let envy divide us, or are we going to support, or going to be the support for one another? This morning, maybe you've let envy motivate what you do. How do you fix that? Well, first of all, you got to ask God for forgiveness. Lord, I'm sorry for the envy that's in my heart. If you're jealous, if you're envious of the neighbor that just got the new boat, why don't you go make him your friend? Maybe he'll take you out on his boat. Why don't we try that approach rather than envying everything he has? But we've got to ask for forgiveness. For those this morning who are here and don't know Jesus, and you don't have a relationship with him, I want to remind you that sometimes even Christian friends will let you down. They're human. They make mistakes. They do gossip. They may not always treat you perfectly. But I want to introduce you to the one who says that is closer than a brother. That friend that will never betray you, will always have your back. And his name is Jesus. Jesus loves you so much that he suffered a miserable death on the cross. A miserable death. Beaten and bloodied because he loves you. To pay the penalty for sin. So what do you have to do to enter into a relationship with him? How do you become his friend? Well, you simply have to trust him. Put your faith in him. Invite him into your life and into your heart. And he will be the friend that sticks closer than a brother.